Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the H.F. Langenberg Memorial Speaker Series that's brought to you by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise and the Plaster College of Business and Entrepreneurship at Lindenwood University. That's a mouthful, right? I'm Grant Black, your host for tonight's exploration of the exciting and complex intersection of economics and professional sports. Since its inception in 2017, the H.F. Langenberg Memorial Speaker Series has aimed to bring leading intellectuals right to our doorstep in the St. Louis region, sparking meaningful discussions that resonate within our community. Thank you all for joining us tonight, whether you're here in person or online. Your enthusiasm for exploring ideas that shape our lives is what makes events like this truly special. I encourage everyone here, whether in the audience or tuning in virtually, to connect with one another. Take a moment, even now, to introduce yourself to the person that's sitting next to you. And for our online participants, don't hesitate to share your thoughts and questions in the chat throughout the event. And for our student participants here, this is important. Later, we will share a QR code and link where you can report your attendance and which classes or instructors you may be getting participation training for. That's the most important. So you'll see one of those links in a minute, and we're going to show it again at the end. So you can, if you don't catch it right away, you can just catch it at the end of the event in a little while. Before we bring out our distinguished speaker, I want to recognize those whose generosity and ideals make events like this possible. Harry and Nina Langenberg and John and Barbara Hammond. And while they couldn't be with us in person tonight, their support has been invaluable to our mission at Lindenwood University for many, many years. So I would like us to just stop for a moment and thank them for their continued support. This evening, we have the privilege of hearing from Patrick Rishe, whose insights on the dynamics of professional sports markets promise to ignite some thought-provoking conversations. And after his initial remarks, we'll open up the discussion by allowing participants to ask questions. So as he's speaking or things you already have in mind, just be thinking of questions you're ready to ask. Dr. Patrick Rishe is the Executive Director of the Sports Business Program within the Ullman Business School at Washington University. Now in his 10th year as the director, Dr. Rishe oversees all aspects of program operations, from classroom instruction to student job placements to creating experiential learning opportunities like the many immersion trips that their program takes. He's also the founder of a sports consulting firm named Sports Impacts. He's a sports business contributor with CNBC, and he's the author of They Shoot, They Score, a book on sports business leadership and strategy that features 50 interviews with sports industry leaders, executives, and deal makers. Founded in 2000, his Sports Impacts consulting practice has executed over 100 client projects. Those include 3 Super Bowls, 3 Final Fours, the 2024 NFL Draft in Detroit, a Ryder Cup and a President's Cup, and a Major League Baseball All-Star game. Academically, Dr. Rishe has published numerous articles in peer-reviewed academic journals, including Sports Marketing Quarterly and International Journal of Sport Finance. Lastly, as a frequently quoted sports business expert, Dr. Rishe regularly appears on CNBC Squawk Box to opine on sports business issues and has also offered his sports business insights for outlets such as NBC Nightly News, CBS News, CNN, Fox Business, and ESPN. So I think we're all in for quite a treat tonight, learning about what's really going in the intricacies of the sports markets. So join me in giving a warm Lindenwood welcome to Dr. Patrick Rishe.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, sorry.
Here.
So I've got to watch my marks tonight because I have to stay in between the banners for the camera. So thank you so much for having me here tonight at Lindenwood. As I was telling some of the folks when I first arrived tonight, it'd been a long time from my first visit in the early 2000s to the time that I came here for a nice little stroll during the pandemic era in 2021. And I could not believe the change in this campus. So you youngsters that are here tonight, believe me, you're in a much better place now. And not that it was bad in the early 2000s, but just the market difference between what the campus was then and what it is now. So my compliments to whoever, and they're not here in the room perhaps, but whoever was responsible, leaders, chancellors, deans, for all those upgrades to the campus. The buildings, the facilities here are top notch, and I think you've got a great business school here. We are going to talk about some topics that are going on in the real world in the sports industry, and then afterwards, happy to take questions from the group. One thing that I will say is perhaps once the camera stops rolling, because there are so many students in here, I'm more than happy to have kind of an impromptu little career discussion with you. As I was with some of these young gentlemen in the hallway before we got started. As the director of the sports business program at WashU, this is what I do, right? What I do, a big part of my job is I try to help young people, 19 to 22 years old, that are trying to find their way into the sports industry, to give them a little guidance and direction of how to look for work, what are some of the paths. And the great thing for you all is there is no one path. As I told the guys that I spoke with earlier, there is no one path. There's nonlinear paths. And we have 150 alumni at WashU that work in the sports industry. And if you just go on LinkedIn and follow their career paths, it is truly all over the map. Some have been in the sports industry right from when they graduated for 30 years. And then others started in special education and somehow found their way working with the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Nets. It truly is all over the map. So that's a good thing. And hearing some of these examples may hopefully help you with your path. So before we get into that impromptu discussion later on tonight, why don't we get into this? And before we do the presentation, I also wanted everyone to get their phones out. I'm going to get out of the way, or duck, because there's a QR code that I'd like you to scan. And if we have the email addresses of the people here tonight, and Matt probably does, or however the registrations, I can send a discount code. One of the areas of the sports industry that is taking off is the business.
Push through to your, I forgot a couple slides, so if you want.
Okay, sure. One of the areas of the sports industry that is taking off is the business of women in sports. You don't have to look too far to recognize this and understand this. And so we at WashU, the first business school in America, this year put on a multi-episode webinar series solely dedicated to the business of women in sports. So I'm going to step out of the way for a second. If you scan that QR code, you don't have to sign up now, but just you have it in your tabs. And this is our series. We're doing 6 episodes this year. And the second episode is actually the day before the election on Monday, November 4th from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. So students, if you have a class, obviously skip it. And, and we're doing an episode on life after Caitlin, sustaining the growth in women's college basketball. And our 3 speakers for this webinar will be the chair and vice chair of the Division I Women's Basketball Committee. Dorita is with the University of Arkansas. Amanda is with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Look at that. We got you. And then lastly, Jackie, she's the Senior Associate Commissioner at the Atlantic Coast Conference in Charlotte. They have new offices in Charlotte. So something that potentially would be really great, and more about our series, you can see some of the topics that we're covering. Next, we're talking about in December, the launch of the new Professional Volleyball League, which starts in 2025. How are they launching a league from scratch? Why did they pick the markets they picked, like Austin and Madison and Omaha and so forth? In February, the first one of 2025, she shoots, she scores. So you hockey ladies, that's right up your alley or your crease, if we're going to use the right sports pun. Goal to expand in March, that's the National Women's Soccer League and expansion in that league. And then lastly, and of course, making me feel old, students will not get that reference, perhaps, is the famous 80s song, She Blinded Me with Science. Well, we modified that a little bit. She blinded me with data science, as we speak with many women who work in sports business analytics, which for those of you that are into analytics, a lot of opportunities out there in the industry. So that's our series, and hopefully you use that QR code and you join us. So I realized, boy, did I pick a bad subject for St. Louis talking about the NFL? Probably. But, you know, the youngsters in the room probably aren't as tainted about this. And I'm not from St. Louis originally, so I don't think about these things as maybe as it hurts as much to people that, of course, the NFL has left St. Louis not once, but twice in our lifetimes. But there was a news story that broke earlier this year about private equity now coming into the National Football League ownership. And so I wanted to talk about that topic It's a very interesting topic, and may do a little bit of Q&A here, as it's typically the way I work with students in my classroom. So may do a little Q&A to get you involved as we go through this discussion. Some background information. Breaking news story, this was from August of 2024, that the NFL owners approved private equity deals unlocking billions. How much are NFL teams worth these days? Anybody have a guess of who would be the highest valued professional football team? Any guesses?
Was
The Dallas Cowboys. And do you have any guess what their value is in billions? I think you're pretty close to right. We'll have the number in a second. But these franchises are not worth millions. They're worth billions. And I think the median NFL franchise is around $6 billion. The biggest reason for that, by the way, the biggest reason why NFL franchises not only are worth that much, but are worth more than any other pro sports leagues is due to one key revenue source. What is that key revenue source? TV, media revenue, where they're getting now roughly 10, 11 billion a year from the likes of ESPN, NBC, and now streaming on Amazon, right, on Thursday nights, which drives some people nuts. This is where we're at. So the part of the reason I'm sharing those numbers with you is as the cost of buying into the league gets larger and larger and larger, the pool of potential buyers gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And is that a good thing? And the answer is probably not. So this gives you some insight as to why the NFL was open-minded about letting these private equity companies come into the ownership groups, but only at a minority stake. In other words, a small stake. And in particular, as you'll see in a few minutes, they capped the stake at 10%. So if a private equity firm, and we'll mention a couple of them in a few minutes, if they do choose to become part owners of a team, they can only come in at 10%. By the way, all the other pro sports leagues, they have caps as well. Those caps are a little bit higher, 20 or 30%. Is there something that happened in the last couple of years, by the way, in the world that maybe made each of these sports leagues think we need more help to finance our teams? Something that shocked our financial system to the core? COVID. Because when COVID happened and the pandemic happened, what sources of revenue get impacted in sports? Everything. Ticket sales, media deals, partnership deals, corporate partnership deals, all of it. So these were all things that obviously looking for some help. And by the way, these other leagues, the reason why they allow a higher cap, 20%, 30%, they aren't as wealthy as the NFL. And by the way, the NFL being the wealthiest of all the leagues, they're always a last mover because they can afford to be. Same thing when they started allowing gambling corporate partnership deals that you may see at Enterprise Center when you watch a game on TV or at the stadium or at other professional sports teams. Those other leagues allowed partnerships with alcohol companies, partnerships with gambling companies long before the NFL, because the NFL wanted to step back and see how it played out. And once they saw how it played out, they're like, okay, we're good, we can get in. Same thing with private equity money. All these other leagues let the private equity money come in first, and the NFL kicked back. Let's see how that works out. What are best practices? What are lessons we can learn from the other leagues? Because all these owners from different leagues, they know each other. They chat with each other. The NFL got confidence it was going to be fine, so they did it. So I've given you a lot already, but this headline begs many questions. Who owns these NFL franchises? How much are these franchises worth? What is private equity? Why would NFL owners want private equity investors? We've answered that one. The pros and cons of private equity money. Again, we've talked about question 6 already. What's the cap? And then how does the NFL differ from the other leagues? Well, we actually answered a lot of these questions already, haven't we? That's why I led off with it at the beginning. People will have better attention at the very beginning. Who owns these teams, by the way?
big egos.
Well, that's true. It's interesting, and you work in the entrepreneurship space. So some of these companies are family entrepreneurships, essentially. Some are. That's more of the old school model, right? Where back in the 50s and 60s, as the NFL was gaining footing, these were family-run businesses. But now it's more likely that it's a corporate. So you still have people running these corporations, but it's more of a corporate presence. The most recent sale in the NFL, by the way, the Harris Blitzer Group, Josh Harris, also owns the I want to say the 76ers and the Devils. So he purchased, along with others, including Magic Johnson, buying a small share of the Washington, whatever they're called now, Commanders. So the owners of these teams, well, 5 teams have been owned by the same family since 1933. So there is still a family ownership component to some of the teams. The Spanos family that owns the Chargers is another example. 25% or 8 of the teams have been owned by the same family since 1970. 50% of the teams have been owned by the same family since 1985. So these are assets that are not just bought and sold like day trading. These are assets that are typically held for long periods of time. And the one key exception, a unique exception in sports, is the Green Bay Packers. That's more of a public trust, even though you can have a document showing that you're a shareholder, but you don't really have any power. But still, it's cool for those people that have it. They can hang it up on their wall. Hey, I own one small portion of the Packers, even though you don't really have much say. Okay, so again, my friend Kurt Badenhausen used to write at Forbes. Now he writes for Sportico. So he talks about the average team value across these different leagues. So the average team value, the NFL is at $6 billion, NBA $4 billion, baseball $2.6 billion, and hockey $1.3 billion. Again, to answer the answer you gave earlier, the main reason for these differences across those franchise values is the media revenue. That's how important media revenue drives the business of not only pro sports, but guess what? College sports as well. So, who are the top value teams? And now we have some deeper understanding as to why Stan the Man Kroenke decided to move the Rams from St. Louis to Los Angeles. Because when he did that, the Rams went from being one of the lowest valued franchises in the NFL to one of the highest. I'm not saying I'm a fan of what he did. I know that for those of you from St. Louis, that cut deep. But from a business perspective, we now understand by looking at this data. And of course, part of it had to do with market size. Part of it had to do with the new stadium that generates a lot of revenue. What's interesting here is market size tends to rule the day, doesn't it? So even though the Giants and the Jets, especially the Jets, haven't been, the Jets have not been a winning franchise since the Joe Namath guarantee in 1970, but they play in New York. And MetLife Stadium, that generates a fair degree of revenue. Miami, large market. Philly, large market. Now, the Raiders are not a large market, but they have an unbelievable stadium that was largely publicly financed. And they, again, that's a huge benefit. They generate a lot of revenue from that building year round. So that helps push them in the top 10. Now, you may ask this question, well, wait a minute. If New York has 2 teams, the Giants and Jets, in the top 6, where's the other LA team? Where are the Chargers, and why aren't they in the top half? In fact, the Chargers are in the bottom third. Why is that? You really know your sports business if you know the answer to this question. Why are the Chargers in the bottom third, even though they're in LA and they play at a new stadium?
They moved from San Diego to LA.
Well, they did, but the dynamics is in New York at MetLife, the Giants and Jets basically share the revenues. There isn't like a big brother, little brother dynamic, at least financially. Whereas the deal that Stan Kroenke cut is he owns SoFi, and the Chargers are merely tenants. So they don't get a large share of the rev. And then, by the way, we look at the least valued franchises. Typically, the market size is going to be one of the smaller markets. So Cincy, Jacksonville, New Orleans, Phoenix, Indianapolis, Buffalo, These are some of the smaller markets in the NFL. The Lions are a larger market than the others, but the Lions, aside from recently, have been relatively moribund. Last thing I'll mention is, the Packers, they're the smallest market in the NFL, but because of the legacy of the Packers brand, that's strong enough to at least bring them out of the bottom third. So all these factors matter to differing degrees. It's interesting stuff. So again, one of the cool things about the Packers being a publicly traded team, or a public franchise, I should say, not publicly traded, but a public franchise, is every summer they have a shareholders meeting and they have to divulge their financials. This is a rarity in sports. Pro sports owners do not want to divulge their financials, but the Packers have to. And the beautiful thing about this for geeks like me is this gives you insight into the business of football, because some of these revenues are shared, which means that when they report a national revenue of $374 million in 2023, that means that's the share of the national television revenue that they get. So every team in the NFL gets $374 million annually in 2023 just from the national media deal. You know why that's crazy? The salary cap in the NFL for that year, I think, was under 250. Translation, these teams are making money and paying their entire salaries without even considering local revenue. How nice is that? So at any rate, this does give some insights, and you can see that shared revenue has grown and grown steadily over the years. Again, that shared revenue is largely media revenue. Private equity. I don't know how many people in here are finance majors. I know you are. We just talked about it, but just a little background here. So private equity, again, when you invest in a private equity fund, you are investing in a fund managed by a private equity firm. That's the advisor. And a typical investment strategy undertaken by private equity funds is to take a controlling interest in some company or business. In the case of pro sports, if you have a private equity fund, a company that's managing investments, so we are all wealthy people, we invest in a private equity fund, and someone at that fund manages our money, and they've decided that we want to get 5% share of the Indianapolis Colts. So our money is now, we are minority shareholders of the Colts. That's the dynamic, okay? So why would the NFL welcome private equity minority ownership? Well, we've answered that question earlier, but one of the beautiful things about our network at WashU is we have people all over the map. Of that 150 people that work in sports, some of them are literally kids your age that just graduated in May. But some of them are industry big-time players, and one of those big-time players is Mark Affolter, partner and co-head of U.S. direct lending for a company called Ares Management. This is one of the big private equity companies in America. And there's Mark, a little bit, put a face with a name. But to give you more perspective on Ares, you can't see the number here because of the screen sharing symbol. They raised over $3.5 billion. So just imagine that we were all wealthy individuals that wanted to get into the sports and entertainment industry investing. And Mr. Affolter collected $3.5 billion from us. And he is now charged with spending our money and investing our money in various enterprises in sports. So that means he could be investing in Professional Women's Hockey League or the rise of pickleball. That's a sport, that's a real thing now, right? In esports, any of these things, that's what his company does, is they look at the lay of the land and try to figure out where's the best place to spend our money to get us a rate of return in the future. And I actually shared with my students, I had an email exchange with Mark the day before I lectured on this topic at my class at WashU in September. And I just want to make sure, I said, Mark, you're the guy that works in this industry day in, day out. So I just want to make sure I'm not BSing my students. I want to make sure I'm telling them the right thing. So I said, as we're covering this in class, we try to be succinct. And I said, what I've read in the past, the main pros for private equity in sports, is the infusion of cash allows teams to invest in other capital improvements, such as upgrades to buildings. That's a major expense in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, so that's one way that they can spend private equity money, is to upgrade the facility, or maybe help pay for a new building, right? But then the other thing that's huge is the PE, private equity investment, allows the league to consider a slightly larger candidate of future potential owners. So he agreed with these reasons. The other thing I want to ask you is, what do you think is the biggest con of private equity investment, and basically the reason why these limits are capped at 10 or 20 or 30%? Why do you think these leagues have strategically capped the amount that private equity companies can invest? You not only do you not want to give up control, that's exactly right, but people that are private equity interests, they are worried about one thing: profits. But when you're Chris Zimmerman, who's Chris Zimmerman?
Or the Blues.
Not the owner of the Blues, but he's the president of business operations for the Blues. Yeah. And his counterpart with the St. Louis Cardinals is Bill DeWitt III, who's the son of the owner. Okay? If you're those gentlemen, you can't just care about profits, because you've got fans sitting in those seats, and those fans won't come back to their seats unless you're happy. So they have to care about the fan experience. But a private equity company may not. So that's why you've got to keep them kind of in the bullpen, to use a sports analogy, or on the bench if we're talking about hockey, right? We want your money, and we're going to try to do our best to help you make a better investment in the future, but we don't want you being the ones making all the decisions. So hopefully, if you walk away with nothing today, you have an understanding why private equity money has come into sports. Teams can use this money to help upgrade their facilities. The other thing they can use it for, which is a huge part of the sports industry today, Ballpark Village is an example of this. What is Ballpark Village? How would you describe Ballpark Village, just generally speaking? What would you call that? How many of you have been to Ballpark Village? Okay, several of you. Okay, so what do you call that? I knew it was coming at some point. Or you could also say it's an amenity, right? It's an amenity for people in the community to utilize. But guess what? Is Ballpark Village open when the Cardinals don't play? Absolutely. So it's a mixed use development project. And a lot of sports teams have them now because they want to monetize their investment, not just on the days of games, but all year round. I have a couple students from Atlanta, and I think it's the Battery District is the district where the Braves new stadium in Cobb County is based. So it's this huge entertainment complex. Those of you that have been to Sporting KC matches, soccer matches, what do they have there in Kansas? They have a mall, they have other stuff. It's about generating revenue from the team's perspective year round, not just on the days of the game. And by the way, oftentimes the teams get a cut of that action, so to speak. So at any rate, we've talked about why the cap, and I believe here's a table that shows you what the layout is in the other leagues. So again, this was previously, now it is no longer prohibited. Now it's capped at 10%. But maximum equity a team can sell to private equity funds, you can see it's capped at 30% for all the other major sports leagues in this country. And my guess is we don't have some of the women's leagues on there, but my guess is there's a similar cap for those leagues. So that's a summary of a recent relevant industry topic where you see the intersection of finance and economics and sports, and you hopefully have a better understanding of why private equity is allowed, why it's capped, why the pandemic led to its proliferation across all these different leagues. And if you can take away those three things from tonight's lecture, that's great. So with that said, I believe we're going to have some Q&A, but you're going to tee this off with a particular question, which certainly is not a controversial question by any stretch. But happy to take any questions from you. And keep in mind, before I answer any questions, I'm used to taking questions off the cuff. So I'm not necessarily, I can't say that I will be 100% prepared to answer a question. I'll react best I can. Secondly is some of the questions may have a political tone to them. I'm not a very political person, so I'm going to answer it from an economist perspective, but also perspective of what do I know is to be true from other examples in other cities and other states and so forth. So having that said, that's an important caveat. Pro tip, do these presentations, make sure you throw in those caveats. So we'll go back to you and you can fire off that first question.
All right. And before we start, we'll open this. We have lots of time for questions. So seriously be thinking of questions. We wanted to make this as dynamic as we could. So to really talk about a lot of issues. I know some of us earlier were talking about sort of the impact of a lot of our local teams or sporting events and things like that you may be able to speak to. So here's the first question. Obviously a super hot topic right now are the two proposed amendments on the Missouri ballot or local ballots related to sports betting. And so could you speak at all to what these may mean, what their impact could be, what experiences have been in other places with things like this?
Sure. Let me lead off by saying this. You know, when we talk about sports gambling and the business of how many states have legalized sports gambling, one of the fun things of being in front of 19, 20, 21-year-olds is you can ask them a bunch of questions. And they don't have to answer my questions, but they usually are very open and honest. So I say, okay, how many of you degenerates, I say that jokingly, how many of you degenerates are gambling on a regular basis? And you know, when I see all these hands go up, I'm like, oh my God, this is, you know, so yeah, we're not naive here. And I'm not judgmental. Like I'm agnostic when it comes to these sorts of things. Let me give a little background before I answer the question. So for those of you that are not aware, for a long, long time, gambling on sports was only legal, for the most part, in the state of Nevada, right? And then in 2018, I believe, PASPA, which was an acronym for basically the statute that was in place for roughly 20 years that prevented states from acting on this or making it legal, was abolished. It was largely abolished in part because there was a op-ed written in the New York Times by the current commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, in which he made a strong case for why sports gambling should be legalized across states. And he mentioned various things in that article. And if you have a chance to Google that article, I would encourage you to do it. Adam Silver, again, you're talking to somebody that is around a lot of these sports executives. I mean, that's what I do. I go to conferences, I go to events. He is widely regarded as one of the smartest people in the sports industry. And I'm not just saying that because he looks like my older brother. At any rate, it was shortly after his letter to the New York Times that PASPA was abolished. And then different leagues, slowly but surely, states started to legalize. We are currently, my numbers may be a little bit off, we are currently at 38 states, plus the District of Columbia, that have legalized sports gambling. Okay. And that's since 2018. And that includes all 7 states that border Missouri. I'm not going to rip off what the names of each of those states are because it means I'm going to show my my lack of prowess in geography, but you all know the surrounding area, right? So Illinois, Tennessee, Kansas, these sorts of places. And what's interesting is that from an academic, and I forget about academic, well, what's the data say? And part of the issue right now is because it's still so new in many of these places, we don't necessarily have data on what are the impacts or effects in some states on funds raised for education, has there been a noticeable change in, you know, awful events that have happened from people that are addicted to gambling? this sorts of data, which are hot button topics, understandably, right? What I can tell you is that in states where they've legalized sports gambling, there is data that shows that you're generating, tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue. Now, the question is, how do you spend that revenue? And then this gets into political issues in every state. Every state has different political players. And so that can be a challenge. I was sharing earlier, so going back to the WashU network, I've heard some really great conversations and lectures on this topic. The father of one of my current students, he is a lawyer in New York that works with and goes to a lot of these state legislators, including Jeff City in Missouri, to try to educate everybody based on his knowledge of working on other states of pros and cons, and tries to help them with the wording of the legislation and what tends to work and not work in other states. One of our alums is a senior VP of gaming at the NBA headquarters in New York, Scott Kaufman-Ross. He's done the same thing, where he's basically going and lobbying. So one of the things that I can share with you, just in terms of, let's take Missouri out of it for a second. So the states that haven't legalized, when you talk to people that work in this industry, they will say it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So if it's not passed this November, it's going to eventually pass. And usually the reason why it is not passed, and again, let's step out of Missouri. Every state has their own story. Okay, so there's no brush. What's the term I'm looking for? Thank you. Okay, there's different stories in each state. If you ask my buddy Scott Kaufman-Ross, and he's the expert, I'm just channeling what he said. State of California, the main reason, and state of Texas, two of the biggest, are they the two biggest states in this country? And along with New York, two biggest states in this country have not legalized. In those states, it's largely because there are competing interests in those states, specifically the Native American groups, that tribal gaming is legal. So their concern on the tribal grounds is that when you legalize it across the state, you're going to hurt our business. So my suspicion is that if they can just find some way to mediate whatever that gap may be, that eventually they will get across the line in those states. In this state, part of the issue has been a particular kind of gaming, and some of those gaming operators, again, worried about competition. I can only tell you what I've heard from the experts. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So if it's not this November, at some point, but you want to ask these questions. And again, I'm not getting into the morality of it, right? Some people, that is a big issue, and I respect those people. From an economics perspective, I know I have students currently that get in their car and drive over to the east, across the bridge, and will place bets in Illinois. So is that a little bit of a drain? And what is that drain? I mean, who knows? But it's a complicated issue. I understand and respect all of the perspectives on both sides. But I'm just trying to educate you on what are some of the issues, what are some of the topics, why does it pass, not pass in certain places. It does raise tax revenue, but the question is, where is it going, and does it go to education? Like you see these ads locally, it's going to raise $100 million for education. I can't answer that. I haven't studied it carefully in the state of Missouri. I don't know that. But I also am skeptical of the other side that says, well, it's not going to go to any education. I don't know. I do know it generates tens of millions of dollars in the states that have legalized, and then it's a question of where do they spend it. That's a state-by-state question. So hopefully I've given you a kind of a balanced level answer there. So open up to other questions.
I'm gonna use the mic, so I'm gonna run around just to make sure everybody online can hear the questions.
That is a fascinating topic. I mean, there's no question about it.
Thanks, Grant. Yes, sort of like Ballpark Village, possibly. I believe there's a developer in St. Louis who's trying to develop property around the soccer stadium. Do you know how that's going, and is that going to be a success, do you think?
So I don't know where that stands right now. So I apologize for not being up to date on that. We should have my friend Frank Cusimano in here from Channel 5. He might have more insights on that. But just in terms of very interesting, the difference, and I don't know how that is planning on being built or financed. For those of you that are not aware, the way the Cardinals ballpark, well, the Cardinals end up paying for a lot of that themselves. The Taylor family paid for all of City Park with the exception of infrastructure and so forth. Ballpark Village was not paid for strictly by the DeWitt family. That was, there was a public investment, considerable one. So I don't know if the discussion with the development around City Park is, again, coming just from the Taylors or whether there's going to be a public-private partnership. I think the one thing that I will say from I'm not a St. Louis lifer, but I have been here for 26 years. In my observation, and this is a key term that you all should think about when people start talking about economic impact of developing new things, is the term displacement. So if you hear that term displacement, what does that mean to you, displacement? If something's been displaced, what does that mean? Someone said it. Put out. So that's right. So if something is displaced, it's been moved from one place to another. So I could say I've just displaced this pointer from here to over here. Okay. You moved it. When I first moved here in '99, by the way, I'm the reason the Rams won the Super Bowl in '99. When the Rams won the Super Bowl in '99, I moved here. Laclede Landing was a poppin' spot to be. When's the last time any of us have been to Laclede Landing? Okay. And then they developed Wash Ave, right? And I can remember, back in my one of single days, I remember going down to Wash Ave, right? I'm trying to remember some of the restaurants there between, say, 14th and 9th. There are a lot of places down there. Rosalita's, Brennan's, yada, yada. I shouldn't remember those places. That shows you how much I went down there. Point being, it wasn't as though the activity at Laclede's Landing remained the same, and now you had more activity on Wash Ave. No, no, no. The spending went from Laclede's Landing to Wash Ave. And then guess what? When Ballpark Village was built, Wash Ave died down, Ballpark Village blew up. What's the point? Is anybody that tells you, well, each time we build the new development in downtown, that's a net increase for downtown financially and spending? I'm not so sure about that. Because if people are simply moving their spending from one place of downtown to another, is there really a net increase in spending? Now, there's data out there. We could look at the tax data to see. So I only bring that up, going back to your question. I think in the case of any development around City Park, I'd like to think that that would be additive. Maybe not in a huge way, but maybe it's going to bring a different vibe, a different environment than what you have at Ballpark Village. And if the Taylors are behind the development of that area, they may specifically go out of their way to put in elements and amenities that maybe are a little different than what you have at Ballpark Village. But the way the last 25 years have worked, if you do develop around City Park, on the days that there's no sports, I don't expect both Ballpark Village and the development near City Park to both be popping. Some of that money will filter from Ballpark Village to City Park. On match days, different story. Match days, City Park development be popping. On Cardinals days, Ballpark Village will pop. But when there's nothing down there, I don't expect both of them to be. And maybe it helps a little bit with convention business. Just a quick aside. I talked about the night and day of, boy, I was at Lindenwood 2001, 2002. I came back in 2021 and oh my God. I had the same epiphany last week. I did a radio interview at Westport Plaza. I hadn't been to Westport Plaza in 3 years. Have any of you been to Westport Plaza recently? Not bad, right? And are you from St. Louis? Yes. And do you remember where it was 3 years ago? Well, it's good. It's a good thing you didn't experience that. When I first moved to St. Louis in '99, Westport Village was okay. But then it really went downhill. Now, be honest, I'm probably going to go to 360 Hilton when we're done tonight and have a nice little beverage. It's really turned into a nice area where you've got a lawn where kids, Friday night, they got a big screen and like 50 families out there watching a Disney movie. You have a nice Rawlings Experience Center where people can go to a batting cage. It's been cleaned up. So I'd love to see more of that in the community, but that costs, there's an expense to that. But I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's always my concern is when you build up a new area, are you really going to see a net increase or are you just going to displace spending from one part of downtown to another? Yes.
Could you, oh, you want me to wait for your? Sorry, not to make you run across the river. Thanks. Could you maybe just talk a little bit your thoughts and your view on Taylor Swift's economic impact on the NFL and the Chiefs? Because that is, it's something that I feel like a lot of people talk about, right? I think it's something a lot of people talk about, but it's still, I think there's maybe more to dive into there, and I'd just love to get your thoughts.
So again, one of the benefits of being in my shoes is I know people that work in the industry that look at some of the social media following, and it is true that the NFL has seen an increase in social media followers that are Taylor Swift's demographic. So who are Taylor Swift's demographic? I'm guessing, right? I know who she is. I hear her songs. I'm not a Swiftie, but I know that her demographic has historically been a very strong young female demographic. And that typically, even though there's a lot of women that watch the NFL, I think the numbers are 45% of NFL fans are women. There's no question that there has been an increase in the young female demographic that are now coming to the sport of football. And there is a difference. You can look at the data pre and post their relationship, and you can see that that demo has increased. So there's no question that that has an impact on engagement. And similar to, and I didn't mention this in the gambling answer, the reason why all the local teams support gambling, and separately, the reason why the NFL probably isn't sad about this relationship is because it increases engagement, which could lead to you're more likely to watch, you're more likely to buy merchandise, maybe even buy a ticket. And all of those have revenue consequences for the league. So yeah, it has had a positive impact. So, God forbid, if their relationship happens to end, so if there's Swifties in the crowd, they're like getting ready to throw darts at me. But if the relationship were to end, the hope is, probably from the league's perspective, that some of those newer fans of the NFL, maybe now they actually, maybe even if 25% of them, like, boy, I actually like football. I never really watched the games before, but this is actually kind of fun. If they stick around and remain fans, then that's still a win for the league, because those are fans they didn't have before that weren't going to be fans. Next question.
Somebody's got to have a question.
Don't be shy.
Matt, are there any questions online?
I really have that online crowd just captivated.
I would ask as a follow-up what people are thinking,
Yes.
if related to sort of the local impact, what have been maybe bigger success stories in our local community in terms of sporting events or venues or developments that have been a larger impact here?
So let me answer that by just slightly modifying the question. What has become big business in this country is trying to recruit sporting events to your community. Economic impact, if you're defining it as an economist would, it's not about how many people attend, it's about where are they coming from. If we hosted what we did in St. Charles, we hosted the Frozen Four several years ago. That was the year that my Clarkson University Women Golden Knights, I'm from Potsdam, New York, where Clarkson is, they won the Women's Frozen Four. But if everybody that goes to that is from St. Louis or St. Charles, that's not new money flowing into St. Charles. So that's not considered economic impact. So I bring that up because we have an organization here in St. Louis, the St. Louis Sports Commission, some great people there. Their previous president, Frank Viverito, been friends with him for 25 years. Same with the new president, Mark Schreiber, former tennis partner of mine. Everybody at the Sports Commission is great. They've got a staff of 8 people, and part of their job is to recruit events to St. Louis. Their jobs become much harder. When I first moved to St. Louis in '99, and these sports commissions across the country, there's now 900 of them. They've been around. This artifice of sports commissions has been around since the 80s. The St. Louis Sports Commission is a 3-time sports commission of the country. They haven't won it in a long time. Part of it is because as other cities realized, hey, there's economic impact in hosting major events like NCAA, Frozen Four, Final Four, regionals, etc., then we're going to go after these events too. Well, let me ask you all, because adults and students alike, I'm sure you've traveled outside of St. Louis and attended sporting events. What makes a community? Let's just think outside the box. Let's not talk about a specific city, but just think about your experiences. What makes a community a fun place to go to a sporting event? What do you care about? I mean, there's a whole list of things. Just let's fire them off.
Public safety.
Public safety, okay? What else? What do you care about?
Price.
Price matters, okay. So price could be not only of the tickets of the event you're going to, but also the affordability of the town that you're going to, because you got to pay for hotels if you're staying overnight. What else?
Restaurant.
Are there restaurants? Yes, sir.
7.
Excitement. So what kind of amenities do you have there? Right?
Weather.
Is the weather good? Okay. What are some other things?
Yes.
Transportation. What's the transportation like? And so as other cities got into the game, and by the way, one other thing, big thing is the facility itself. Like people like to go to cool facilities. Okay. So what's happened over the last 20 years is that the St. Louis Sports Commission, they were one of the first movers in the sports commission world. So they had an edge and they built relationships with people at the NCAA. So that helped them bring events here. And the sports commission is very competent. So you know that we just got the NCAA wrestling championships for the 10th time in the last 25 years. Now you may say, well, who gives a rip about wrestling? Well, don't say that to a wrestler because they'll put you on your back pretty quick. But that event is a decent moneymaker for St. Louis. It brings in $10, $15 million. Why? Because 95% of the people that come to St. Louis for that event are not from St. Louis. And why do they choose St. Louis? Because look at the wrestling populations in Oklahoma, in Iowa, in Minnesota, right? So you bring in out-of-towners that are spending money downtown. Most of us would think, you have to spend 3 days in downtown St. Louis, that's like a sentence. But for these wrestling fans, oh man, just get out of their way because they're either watching wrestling or they're eating. Drinking and eating. Yeah, absolutely. So wrestling's an outlier for us because we've proven ourselves and the NCAA likes us. Again, it's about relationships too. But there are so many of the factors that you mentioned that fast forward to today, and sadly, and this is coming from somebody that's been to all these places, Indianapolis, Nashville, Omaha, Oklahoma City, Minneapolis, all of these cities have passed us because their downtowns are safer. That's a huge factor. Near their stadiums, there's more amenities. You go to the College World Series, men's or women's, Omaha or Oklahoma City, there's tons of stuff to do within walking distance of their stadiums. Well, in Oklahoma City, you got to drive to the stadium, but in downtown Bricktown, they call it downtown, tons of stuff to do, tons of restaurants, tons of hotels, tons of shopping. You mentioned transportation. I just spent a crazy sports weekend in Minneapolis. The main reason for going, sadly, to watch St. Louis City, they got shellacked. by the Loons. Friday night, I was at the WNBA Game 4 Finals. Lynx, St. Louis girl, their star, Niecy Collier. Great series, by the way. And then Sunday, I went to the Vikings-Lions game. Light rail there is great. I stayed out by the Mall of America. You can take the light rail easily to all these places. And I felt safe. And when I got to my destination, I felt safe. Friday night at the Lynx game, Saturday night at the Loon match, Sunday at the Vikings game. There's stuff to do. It's frustrating. I feel frustrated for my friends at the St. Louis Sports Commission because I know they're up against it. And they will still get their share of events. We have a Frozen Four coming in April. For you youngsters, a great way to get involved in the sports industry is volunteer for those events. So they get to know your face and maybe it leads to an internship. And then from there, who knows what happens. We do have a first, second round NCAA men's basketball coming back here. But there's just a lot of things working against us. Yes.
And we've got a question online. So Dan, go ahead.
I guilted the people. You see what I did there? I guilted the people
We've got a
online.
really good question.
Going back to like jobs and segments, you say you come from is there a degree that matters now? Is there a hot industry of people coming out of college that is a fast track? Is there any guidance around how to get in, knowing there's a lot of paths?
Yeah, and as I said, when we're done with the formal session, if there are some students that want to stick around for an extra 15, 20 minutes, I'm happy to answer some direct questions. So how many students that are in here want to work in the sports industry? So I'm happy, if you want to spend a few minutes, I'm happy to answer some questions and give you some guidance. But to your question, that's the easiest question that I can answer because this is what I do, right? For the last 10 years, a big part of my job is I'm the point guard. Here's the sports industry or career paths. Here are my industry connections over here, 500 people strong, 300 companies strong. And so I'm helping the students find them. I'm also helping my contacts find them, find the students. To answer your specific question, if you're good at social digital media, or if you want to be good at it, work on it. Because if you go to teamworkonline.com, all of you, that is an absolute website you need to know, teamworkonline.com. It's the industry go-to source for looking for jobs in sports. That and LinkedIn are two best sources, teamworkonline.com. You'll see so many companies posting social, because, you know, I would put myself in the old fart category. Us old farts, this is not really our skill set, right? It's a little past our time. But many of you, if you're good with graphic arts, if you're good with posting on Instagram, TikTok, whatever the case may be, every freaking team and league wants people that can do that because they can't do it. Or they want to have more people that can do it. So that's the biggest one. Second one, for those of you that are more analytically minded, is analytics. Now, analytics is a very broad term, okay? We're not talking necessarily Moneyball. That's the sexy part of analytics, where you're working in baseball, the sports side of analytics. But there's the analytics on the business side, ticketing, pricing analytics, using analytics to help you sell tickets, to price your tickets, using analytics to identify corporate partners that you should work with in the region, using analytics to gauge which social media posts are working and not working. So there's a lot of different applications of analytics. By the way, those of you that are into engineering or architecture, every field could lead to a sports career. We have 3 WashU engineering majors that all work for DraftKings in coding. They're all 26 years or younger. We have one alum who's 28, 29. He works in Kansas City for Populous, the sports architecture firm. You tell me what you want to do in the sports industry, and I can give you a couple of options as to where you could go. But I'll repeat, there's some careers like in finance where most companies are not going to hire you straight out of school to work in sport finance. What they want you to do is cut your teeth, build your skill set, build your financial management skills, And after 2 or 3 years of doing that, then see what's out there. Because now you are a little bit more mature. Most kids coming right out of school, you haven't had the practical experience yet. But then there's other careers. The most common entry point in the sports industry is ticket sales. And some kids say, oh shit, I don't want to sell tickets. It's much more sophisticated than it used to be. B, if you like working with people, think of it less as sales and more about, I want to help you understand the benefits of being a Blues season ticket holder. Or what are some of the things that so if you like people, if you're a people person, and then if you're good at that, not only do you make better commissions, but then you're going to build better relationships at your company, and then you might get promoted to corporate partnerships or another wing of the company that you want to work in. But I would say the hottest areas broadly are social digital media marketing and analytics. And I would tell students business analytics rather than sports analytics because there's more opportunities to get in. Sports analytics, you either really have to be a stud in terms of your statistical skills, or you have to have some connections. We're very fortunate at WashU. We have 8 young men and women under the age of 27 who have graduated in the last 5 years that actually work in the sports analytics. One with the Cubs, one with the Brewers, one with the Twins, one with the Nationals, a lot of baseball heavy. Yes,
I just want to add on to what you're saying.
please.
Another field to consider is nonprofit organizations do a lot of successful fundraising through sports events and planning and marketing. And so that's a good way to get an entry-level position and to make good connections, to learn how, when you think of the most successful fundraisers for a lot of charities, Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure, for example, or something like Cardinal Glennon, how do they connect with the St. Louis Blues to have something like Goals for Glennon? They have people in-house that do actually sports marketing or sports event planning for these nonprofits. So I just like to throw that in there because there's some people who are looking to also learn about operations. And that's a way that you learn a lot of things that you like, along with things that you don't like. So as you're looking at your career and what your options are, that's very helpful for you to know too.
Absolutely.
All right, here's our last question. We can make this pretty brief
Okay,
before we kind of formally wrap up and then open it up for kind of just some informal discussion.
yes.
For whoever wants to hang out. This is our question online. And maybe before I ask it, I'm going to put in a big plug talking about analytics. All of you need to take the econometrics course in the spring. To get just started how to analyze stuff. Do you have a sense of what the impact of Deion Sanders has been on Colorado's, for the university's, situation and maybe broader, maybe just the state or whatever?
It's been big. Maybe not so much on the field, although this year they're actually performing a little bit better than last year, which shouldn't be a surprise because last year he had a lot of student athletes that were maybe not necessarily his selections. But in terms of the excitement and the visibility that he brought to the University of Colorado, once a proud program in college football, I believe once had a shared national championship back in the late 80s, I believe, with the University of Washington, if my memory serves me correctly. So they used to be really good consistently. And then they really were in the doldrums for a long, long time. You're bringing in Deion, who obviously is a very charismatic guy, has some success coaching at Jackson State, I believe. And there's, you look at the increase in season ticket sales last year in Boulder, and merchandise sales and everything else, and ratings. No question, there was a positive impact. I don't know what the impact on donor funds was. I can only imagine it was significant. And now we're in year 2, maybe still some increases. There's been some improved performance. You wonder how long it's going to last because once his son graduates, sons graduate, is he going to be long for that opportunity? Oftentimes, as I've learned in higher education, in 30 years, once the kids graduate, parents may not be as engaged, word of the night, with the university. So maybe Deion moves on to greener pastures after Shakur goes to the pros. But it's an interesting story just in general. And I know we're near the end, but just the impact. Talk about economic impact. What's the little school in Spokane, Washington that's really good in basketball? Gonzaga. Now, you youngsters that follow college basketball, how many of you follow college basketball? Okay, a few of you. So Gonzaga's been good your entire lifetime. When I was your age, who had heard of Gonzaga? They had one all-time player come from Gonzaga, John Stockton. If you watched The Last Dance, the documentary with Michael Jordan, Stockton and his teammate Karl Malone featured prominently in the last 2 episodes. He's an NBA, one of the best of all time in terms of point guards, all-time steals leader and so forth. Assists too, I believe. He went to Gonzaga. But when Gonzaga got good in basketball, the impact that had on donations to the university, applications to the university. So athletic success, especially when it happens in a school where you don't expect it, can have a massive impact financially on the broader institution. So this year, for example, I know it's early, and I'm not making any predictions, but if a school like BYU or Iowa State, neither of whom was expected to be in this 12-game bowl championship at the end of the year, playoff championship, if those 2 teams make the 12-team playoff, I guarantee you that those schools will see an increase in applications, maybe an increase in donor giving. And it's all about the marketing power of sports. And last comment on this, WashU, I believe, is ranked among American universities. I think we're ranked 25th, 24th. And if you look at the top 30 schools in those rankings, US News, I would submit to you, we have the worst brand recognition. And you know why? There's a lot of factors. We're in St. Louis. We don't have mountains. We don't have beaches. We don't have Division I athletics. We have an awkward name too. Long name. But the Dukes, Stanford, Northwestern, the Ivy League schools are the Ivy League schools. They have their own brand. You look at that list, even a school like NYU or Emory, in big markets, Atlanta, New York. But part of the reason why we probably have the worst brand recognition of the top 30 is part of it is we don't have Division I athletics.
You won Lindenwood.
There you go. I mean, and again, at some point, as you've made this transition to D1, it'd be interesting for someone to do an analysis of how has that raised the profile of the institution, and has it already led to increases in enrollments and in donor funding? No question. Anyone Linden won D1 hockey? I know we have a few. Any male hockey players in here? There's no, again, not to put you on the spot, but I asked this question to my students the other day. Would you have come to Lindenwood if they didn't have hockey? Probably not. And that's okay. But that's an interesting point, because if that's true of most of your teammates, then that's 30 or 40 students that's raised revenue, tuition revenue for this school because you had D1 hockey. Thank you for your time, everyone.
All right, thanks so much. Anybody would like to stick around if they open like that, please scan the QR code. Just fill that out really fast and we'll follow like your attendance here, your instructors. Thanks, everybody. We will see you at some upcoming events. We've got the business ethics panel coming up shortly in November. So we'll have invitations after that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Again, if the students want to stick around for 10 or 15 minutes just to talk about careers, some tips, we can do it. So